I don't think that they're labeled. Yeah, it's fine. He didn't yet. No, you're good. It's out. Something to write with. Get your fast keyboard or your fast pen out to take notes. Are we good to go? I see a hand. I didn't see a thumbs up. Okay, we're good. Hello, everybody watching online. I forget the subtitle.
To reaching people outside your walls, but you're sensing that growth and even effectiveness. Everywhere I go, I talk to pastors of large churches, small churches, every church in between. Once a month or less, and attenders who used to come once a month are showing up half a dozen times a year or fewer times a year. Massive cultural shift. And it's really interesting to see how quickly things have shifted. I started ministry in the mid-1990s, and if someone didn't attend, but contrast that to today. Today, when I run into people I haven't seen at our church in weeks or months, they don't tell me they've left. They tell me they love our church and that they can't wait to get back. Left. They just haven't been lately. So in this chapter, we'll look at some reasons that's happening and then begin to plot out a strategy. First, looking at the characteristics of today's unchurched people and infrequent and engaged people. And please know this. This is a relatively new conversation in many church circles. That's compounded by the fact that our culture is changing faster than ever before as we move from a Christian culture to a post-Christian culture in North America. Conversation anyway. New and innovative approaches will emerge from these conversations that will move the mission forward in a new generation. So, I encourage you to have the conversation despite its lack of definition. I hope this chapter will provide a framework. Being the church is bigger than simply Sunday mornings, but this chapter focuses on the issue of Sunday church attendance. Second, mere church attendance is never the goal, but attendance is a sign of something deeper that every church leader is going to have to wrestle with. Part of how the church in the West gathers even today. 11 reasons why even committed church attenders are attending less often. See, the first key to addressing what's happening is to understand what's happening. So why are even committed attenders attending? There are at least 11 reasons. Reason number one, greater affluence. Money gives people options, all engaging the middle class, the upper class, or a suburban demographic, and is developing. The middle class is shrinking in part, is actually becoming upper class. Both U.S. and Canadian income homes. I am not arguing that things should, simply pointing out that things seem to be happening this way. Again, to the mission of the local church. It's perhaps also fueling some of the As a result, many of those sports happen on weekends, and affluent parents are travel for leisure, even if it's just going out of town to go camping, to visit friends, or to spend a weekend at the lake. And when people are Reason number 4, a 24/7 culture. Having to work the weekend was unusual a few decades ago, but now workers regularly work weekends. We become a 24/7 culture, and the idea of a common pause day, let alone a Sabbath, is a distant memory. People for church. Reason number 5, blended and single parent families. Fortunately, more and more blended families and single parent families are finding a home in church. In a family situation, perfect attendance for a kid or teen might actually be 26 Sundays a year. Similarly, while the affluent might not be in church because of access to reliable transportation, single parents to reliable. So here's people who are not in church because they have a car, and people who want to be in church are often not in church because they don't have a car or because it's not their weekend for church. Especially true with the suburban church movement of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Reason number 6, online options. Churches are also launching online campuses that bring the entire service to you on your phone, tablet, or TV. Or experiences are still establishing a social media presence, and many also podcast their messages as well. As we'll see later in this chapter, and again in chapter 6, there are pros and cons to online church, but there's also little doubt that churches with a strong online but probably likely increase their overall reach. Whether or not your church has online options doesn't make the issue go away. Anyone who attends your church has free access to any online ministry of any church. Online church is here to stay, whether you participate in it or not. Number 7, the cultural disappearance of guilt. When I grew up, I felt guilty. People who feel guilty about not being in church on a Sunday, though, shrinks daily. As I mentioned earlier, I regularly meet in months, but who tell me they love our church. And you need a new strategy. Well, I need a new strategy. Guilty about not being in church, and you feel guilty about not on Saturdays. In church. Reason number 8, self-directed spirituality. Course of treatment. More and more people are self-directing their spirituality. In an institution, but many churches behave like institutions, and the Pope and the If they're not making time for church, that tells you something. Even among the people who say they love church and who say they for gut check, or it could be value that they simply don't see. Either way, failure to see a direct attendance over engagement. When someone merely attends church, the likelihood of showing up regularly or even engaging their faith decreases. As a leader, I value engagement over attendance. Ironically, leaders who value attendance over engagement will likely see declining attendance. Our culture is shifting seismically. Church leaders who fail to recognize this will not be able to change rapidly enough to respond to the shifts that are happening. Change is unkind to the Well, teams that truly want to connect with infrequent attenders and unchurched people need to come to terms with how radically mindsets are changing as our culture is changing. There are a few books that do a great job outlining the shifting mindset in great detail. In my attitude, I've seen a big shift in how unchurched people think. Perhaps the view in Canada is a little bit different than in other regions in North America. Canada, I think, is a little bit of a hybrid between the United States and Europe. Canadians are less churched and more post-Christian than minister. Postmodernism has a deeper foothold here in Canada, where I live, than in almost any place in America except perhaps the Northwest and New England, where it might be about the same. The characteristics outlined below challenge assumptions many church leaders have held, or perhaps still hold, about themselves and about the church. Characteristic 1, they don't all have big problems. If you're waiting for the unchurched person to show up because their life's falling apart, you might be waiting a long time. Sure, there are always people in a crisis who seek God out, but lives without God. Some are actually quite happy and quite successful. If you only know how to speak into discontent and crisis. Number 2, most are spiritual. Even they're actually offended. If you think of character, they're not sure what, quote, Christian. So you need to make that any assumptions about what Christian faith. Clarity is characteristic. I think our assumptions about ministry here. Young adult, because it wasn't a good experience. Don't always apologize for being a Christian. Think about it. If you Another characteristic, unchurched people are intelligent, so speak to that. Don't Next characteristic, they hate hypocrisy. Enough said. Give characteristic. Next characteristic, they invite their friends if they're discovering. Ironically, new or infrequent attenders can become your best inviters. Some to resonate more deeply. Another characteristic, their spiritual growth trajectory varies dramatically. Here's the reality. One size does and one that allows multiple jumping in points throughout the year. A first stick of unchurched people, some want to be anonymous, and some don't. Some unchurched people come in craving immediate connection and no longer fits all in greeting guests. Make sure your church is friendly to both groups. Developing a better approach to infrequent attenders and unchurched people. It's one thing to understand why people attend infrequently or stay away. With approach B when you connect with them. By far, I believe the best response to infrequent attenders is simply this: you embrace them. I use the word embrace on purpose. See, there's something deep-seated in many of us that wants to reject not coming to church much on Sunday can feel an awful lot like rejection to an insecure church leader, which, by the way, is the side of heaven. Unchurched people can initially seem so different in their attitudes, approaches, and even appearances than Christians who've been in the church all their lives. Change your approach. What follows are some different approaches and some new strategies that can help us bridge the gap from a Christian era into a post-Christian era. So, first thing you can do is show empathy. Many of today's church leaders, and maybe that's you, grew up in you remember a time when church attendance thing you did every Sunday. And as church leaders or volunteers, still do every Sunday. So it'd be a little bit hard to empathize with people who do things the way we see them. Personally, I think participating in church weekly, including the best, unless I think this is a personal conviction, not just a vocation. I stopped doing vocation of a local church, including, but that way, hard to do. If you have an attitude, attendance at the gym. My goodness. So I spin on my bike trainer. Book, not a video book, and okay, it's not my goal. Many people think the same way. Behave spiritually. So rather than judging them for it, tell them they're doing great, and then invite them into a deep times a week and had a personal trainer. But if you stand there with a scowl on your face every Sunday, angry about empty seats, why would anyone want to? Method. Somewhere along the way, for a lot of us, we ended up confusing the mission and the method. Your mission is to lead people into a relationship with Jesus. It's presently one of our very best vehicles through which to advance the mission of the church. But our mission is not to fill seats on a Sunday morning. It's to lead people to Jesus. With the method than the mission. And if that's you, repent. I have, and I am. And I think that attitude shift will create a whole new mindset on your team. As Will Mancini, church attendance, you'll start thinking of fresh ways to help people on their journey toward Jesus. And don't miss this. If you really help people move into an authentic relationship with Jesus, they might actually show up more regularly in your church on Sunday. A child takes their first step, we applaud them. We often look down on them or even dismiss them as immature. So a new Christian doesn't read their Bible every day or attend every week the way you want. I get that. But many longtime Christians judging infrequent or new attenders, why not love them? Why not celebrate every time they take a step? Send a handwritten thank you note to each first-time attender. Welcome them when they come back. Throw a party when they show up again 3 months later. Celebrate like jump for joy when someone decides to serve or high five them when they decide to get in a group. Okay, I might be exaggerating a little bit. The point isn't to get weird. The point is to celebrate. And as Andy Stanley says, what you celebrate gets repeated. Celebration is as much about attitude as loves to work and loves to think. I don't naturally celebrate as well as others might. So who, in terms of celebration, probably the best celebrator I know of. I don't think I've ever met a heart or who takes more deliveries might ignore. If you're really trying to figure out what Christians today, Bob's at it. Read his book. Okay, maybe don't. Let God joy approach. Is easier and more effective. Do love people. Can you fully love people without being familiar? Love can be expressed online, but its fulfillment happens deepest through personal contact. Create a culture of serving. One of the problems with regular participation in online church is that it fosters a it's not about what we get, but it's really about what we give. When you get up early to set up portable church or to lead a second grade small serving guests and others outside your community, part of your culture. Another approach is to prioritize kids and teens. See, parents can watch a podcast their name, food, and their hopes and dreams, who says the same thing a loving parent would say, is so far completely irreducible in the online world. I believe churches will prioritize Sundays. Another approach is to create an irresistible experience. The problem with many church services is that they're really honestly resistible. Our experiences aren't compelling enough to draw people back. And those should be among the things church leaders value most. But there's also another element. Many churches don't value excellence. While there's an animated debate about whether churches should be excellent, ask the question this way. Experience is a resistible experience. So if your church is boring, why would anyone want to come back? You've kind of already lost the battle. Another approach is to create an awesome online presence. Even if people aren't with you, and interestingly, some are also shutting them down because online viewership competes too much with physical attendance. Your team will have to decide where it lands on the issue, of course, but you need to ask yourself whether the internet is going away anytime soon. I think we might all agree the answer is no. The online world that's emerging. See, if your church doesn't have the budget or other resources to launch a full online campus, there are still many ways to develop an effective online presence. An effective social media presence is within the reach of any church. You have to know where your congregation lives online, depending on your community near you. But between Facebook, Twitter, podcast app, your church website, and a church or personal blog, you to reach people every day online. And that none of these options or require staff. Volunteers are more than willing to help, and many are already great. Another online platform, they do it for work. Platforms can be a way to shape and even provide giving to churches deepen their journey with Christ. Inspire them, if you challenge them, if you help them, the self. Be the favorite person in their inbox and the favorite thing they see on their feed. And mix things up a little bit at your physical location. Do something unique or fun in the parking lot or full a holiday together with a twist. So, for example, a few years ago, we gave out butter tarts, a unique and amazing Canadian dessert. Things like branded coffee mugs and t-shirts, great gifts for attenders, and they can hand them out to their unchurched friends. But they're available only on campus, not online. Now, that church leaders are puts, not outputs. I agree. Typically, we measure how many people show up, what they gave, who they brought, and even online traffic, but rarely do we measure output. What a sending organization as a receiving organization? And along with that, what if you develop ways to gauge spiritual growth and measure the effectiveness of your witness to the community? The current statistics reveal a surprisingly low amount of personal scripture reading and prayer among Christians. According to a recent study, 57% of Americans read their Bibles 4 times a year or less. In your church, change that. And what if you got innovative and started thinking through whether people are better off 5 years after joining your church than they were before? Or whether they feel closer to Christ, or whether they have a handful of truly deep friendships as a result of being associated. Or what if you began to track whether people are impacting their workplaces and neighborhoods with the love and hope of Christ? In other words, what if you just helped your attenders be the church, not just go to church? What if you measured the impact of the sending as well as you measure but what they measure? So measure carefully. And finally, your relevance is at stake. When things are changing this rapidly in the culture, it's critical that church leaders develop approaches that respond just as quickly. Any gap that emerges between the outdated mediators and the changing pace of culture produces simply irrelevance. Rather than seeing this as an obstacle that's difficult, try to see this as an opportunity. You see, the first century spread rapidly in an than the 1st century. Next question. So for conversation to talk about with your team, question 1, reasons given for either
but the biggest shift he stated that people were coming more because we're seeing an increase in some of our situations. And some is different. You're in a very watch, you can kind of see at times the evidence that this is just so true, what he's talking about. Me go, and because I just see how towards the end as he's talking about, offering something helpful that people can smell. If you just had some ideas that are just going through, or you like some of his, be a part of being a catalyst within our organization at trying to get some things that is needed. I love you. God bless you. Have a great day. For those that are going into another meeting, we'll meet in 10 minutes. So that would be 10:14.